Take your chances.
Yeah, it's all pretty interesting, isn't it, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't have control of our kids in British Columbia. We're the only ones who don't. Everyone else does.
BC has been kind of more progressive
Well, you know, in some areas there are, in other areas.
Oh, you can't actually exit that.
By First Nations. So they hold the cards, and when we say jump, the government goes how high. And so they play a hierarchy of rights, you know? And it's not like we have good relationships with some First Nations. You know, some of the groups are pretty vocal and violent against maintaining BC. But see, we don't have title. Like west of the Rockies, we don't. So we're displaced people, like living there. But in the northwest, east corner, we do. We have Kelly Lake. And yes, we do have a solid foundation there. It's not quite there yet. Though we're part of the whole Métis Nation, we're not recognized as S35 rights holders here. But if I put my foot in Alberta, here I have those S35 rights. So why does site-specific determine under? Why does site-specific determine your right to educate your kids, your right to have controls? See, it was a right we always had. When families were in trouble, their aunties, they would go and stay with someone else. But it was always in that group. It was always within the Métis families or wherever. That was my history. So the government took that right away. That's what we always did. They took it away. And now they say that you have to prove that you're site-specific, you own land. We never owned land, we were called road allowance. We had none. So we were Indian enough to be part of residential schools, but we're not Indian enough to take care of our own kids. Yeah, and that's what it is. And then they play this game, feds and the province play this game. How many wrenches can we throw, right? To let them all fight. So, yeah, so BC's quite a calamity
Thank you guys.
of wrongdoings, and that's what we fight.
Oh my goodness, okay.
Will we win? Absolutely. We'll win.
it's the long game.
Yeah, are we late at the game? Absolutely.
Well, we've got a very sort of dynamic
Yeah.
but in the government's varying for me to a lot of arguments. And some of it is a discussion.
Yeah.
Some of it is like,
Sure.
but people get emotional.
Yeah.
Oh, but the older ones, the tribal rulers, and in my space of environment, tribes are the state issue.
Yeah.
They've not changed their philosophy, their strategy, their tactics change, and the policy.
Yeah.
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 So when you get that, I need to do
Yeah. Yeah. Who's the adult in the room? Yeah. Still there. I love it. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, folks, here we are. Welcome. Get cozy, get comfy, make yourself comfortable. The slot right after lunch can sometimes be a little sleepy. We've all got full bellies. So we may see people continuing to come in, but we are going to close the doors. We're good to go? Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome you. This is the room for the panel on education and SDGs. So hopefully you're all in the right space. If you meant to go to the other one, this is your chance to jump up and run into the other room, which is right next door. It's sort of like when I was a kid, they used to announce, a guy would announce in a movie theater at the front of the room with a microphone what the movie was. Do you remember that? Yeah. Yeah, are you old enough to remember that? And then some people would stand up and go, oh, I'm in the wrong theater. So welcome here. I'll give you a quick blurb on what we're going to be speaking about today, and then I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed panelists. We are in this room until 2:15, and it is our intention to have a Q&A period because we want to hear and we want this to be dialogue-based. So we're hoping at the end to have 10 to 15 minutes of Q&As to hear from you. But the way the panel's going to run is we've got some questions for our panelists once they introduce themselves, so we can hear from them and then turn it over to the crowd. So this panel is going to be designed to examine how Indigenous educational institutes contribute to sustainable development, cultural preservation, and community well-being. This panel brings together experts, educators and advocates to discuss the role of education in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So hopefully that resonates. That's why you're here. That's what you want to hear about and discuss. I'm going to introduce very quickly our panelists and let them then introduce themselves. We have Dr. Yvonne Poitras-Pratt. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Audrey Heston. Nice to see you, Audrey. Thank you for joining us. We have Simon Lambert. Simon Lambert is his pronunciation, but we like to put the French twist on it here. And we have Isabelle Levert-Chiasson. Is that right? Wonderful. These are our panelists, and I would like to start off by giving all of you a few moments to introduce yourself before we get to the questions. Whoever would like to go first.
So I don't know if this is working. I hope it is. I do have a teacher voice, so I can use that. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for choosing to be with us this afternoon in the education panel. I was brought up with the anglicized version of my name, so yes, our lovely moderator, Katie, did a much better job. Yvonne Poitras-Pratt. I am a professor at the University of Calgary, and you can all express your great sympathy with me. I had to choose my word there. I'm at the Workland School of Education. I'm a teacher educator. I've been with the Workland School for 10 years, and I work with pre-service teachers, which means education students, as well as practicing teachers. I went back to school in 1996, with kids aged 2, 4, and 7, and I earned all 3 degrees while raising my 3 kids and remaining married, which I think is a bit of a miracle. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to go to a panel on how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to be an educator. I actually went back to school to earn a 4-year B.Ed. And I often pray to the Creator for the path that I should be following in life. And the Creator showed me that I needed to go this route, something that I didn't know in my own Métis family, that of graduate studies. And so I am now in this position where I get to work alongside people who want to change the world. And that's the ethos that I bring to my classrooms and to anybody who will listen, really, is about the hope of education in terms of realizing our potential and the promise of a better world. I am Métis on both sides, so I've heard people describe me as having a dual pedigree, which I quite like. So my mother is a Fayant, and I'm just finding out her history in southern Alberta. We are related to the Lemirs in the Tsuut'ina Nation. Who knew? Not me. I also have a great-great-grandmother who's Blackfoot, and they don't specify what nation. On my father's side, we go back to 1640, the Kellio Peranto. The heads nodding give me reassurance because I do come from a very proud family lineage, Métis family lineage. We were in the fur trade very actively. Pierre Patras sat on the provisional government with Louis Riel in 1869, so I'm highly political, and I never apologize for that. It's in my blood. And I'd like to say that the ancestors are guiding our way now in education, and I hear them and I feel them. They are calling on us to take up our responsibility to move people forward. And I think, I know I've probably gone past, I'm a storyteller, and I often have to have my students curtail me. So I think, I come from a long, proud Métis family. And the work that I get to do really is the culmination of a lot of hard work from people who've broken the path for me. And I pride myself on being a lifelong learner. So I'm really excited to be in this panel, and I'll pass this over.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you very much.
I'm Isabelle Laval-Chiasson, and I'm an Acadian settler from Nova Scotia, from Unamaki, Cape Breton. And I feel quite honored, privileged to have been invited to this table with all these knowledge keepers and storytellers and whatnot. I was asked to join, I believe, more to offer an international perspective on the conversation with my previous experience working with the United Nations and UNESCO, which is the UN agency responsible for education, and the SDG 4 for quality education for all. But I will also note that I've joined a wonderful team at the federal government with the SDG unit, but I am not representing that team here today, more as a subject matter expert or to share that previous knowledge and storytelling. But yeah, I've been reflecting a lot on my relationship with the land, with my family and my ancestors as well, and what is my role walking alongside in Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaq, but also now being in Ottawa and living in unceded Algonquin territory and having learned a lot more about Métis culture in the last few years and looking forward to learning from all of you.
Thanks, Isabelle.
Yes, is this on?
It's on.
Okay. So, bonjour, Tanche, Kakao Kiawao, Audrey Heston, Dishnakashan, NIA Director de Training and Employment, Gabriel Demont Institute. So, hello, my name is Audrey Heston, and I am the Director of Training and Employment with the Gabriel Demont Institute. Gabriel Demont Institute is a Métis-owned and controlled educational institute in Saskatchewan with a very large mandate that covers a broad area that's not just education. It goes into curriculum development, cultural revitalization, language, employment development, labor market development, all over the place. Like I like to say, I have my fingers in many pies. And that's just kind of the Métis way of doing things. We don't do things in silos. We like to kind of see everything that's out there and see what the connections are. And like our speaker this morning said, braid things together. We work better together when we are combining many different areas. So that's always been kind of my passion. I've spent the last decade at GDI developing our relentless support model of career development, and we are working on kind of putting that all together and publicizing it because it is a very unique way to approach career development and education from a Métis perspective. I guess, yeah. I am Métis. I am a little bit of a mutt, though, half Ukrainian. My Métis family names are Blondeau, Klein, Hamlin, and Desjardins, and we come from the Labret area in Saskatchewan. Very proud to be Métis, very proud to be reclaiming a lot of the heritage that was taken away from us, relearning the language, being able to introduce myself in Southern Michif is a point of pride for me. My grandparents were speakers, my great-grandparents were speakers, but they always said it was French. And we're told that, nope, that's just French, we're not Métis, because that was the world at that point. So I'm very happy to be in a different world now where we can reclaim our language and our culture and be proud of who we are. So I look forward to the panel today. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko te mihi nui, koutou ngā tangata whenua, ngā tangata tiriti, ngā tangata maiti, e whai mā, e tuakana mā, so the mothers to the brothers, to all the people of all the lands, ngā tipuna, the ancestors, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā no tātou katoa. Kia ora, my name is Simon Lambert. My tribal affiliations are to Tūhoi and Ngāti Ruapani mai Waikaremoana in a place called Waikaremoana, Central North Island, Aotearoa. 0 scenes of Lord of the Rings were filmed there, so you'll have absolutely no recognition of the scenery there, thank God. But the tourists tramp all over New Zealand looking for places where they filmed a make-believe trilogy. Okay, it's a long story. They're bringing in a lot of money, and that's serious. We need that. I am down on some documentation as representing the Ministry of the Environment for New Zealand. No. I'm here with 2 other hats. Adjunct Professor, University of Saskatchewan Indigenous Studies Department, and Chief Scientist for Te Tura Whakamātaki, which is a Māori environmental not-for-profit. I took the King's Shilling. I resigned from my faculty position at USAS November 2nd or 3rd of last year. Took the King's Shilling, and a pretty shilling it is too. But it constrains, rightly, what the New Zealand taxpayer wants to hear me wax on about in another country. A lot of strong opinions on education, a lot of good and bad experiences, absolutely accepted as part of the future for our children, for our youth, and for ourselves. And elders are still learning. I mean, knowledge keepers keep learning. It never ends. It is lifelong. And so, we got skin in the game. And in the next 45 minutes, we're going to sort all that out.
Thank you, Simon. Nothing like setting some high expectations. That's awesome. All right. Well, we're going to get to our first question, panelists. Now, I think that maybe the best way to do this, there's an expectation that all of you may answer every question, but I also want it to be comfortable. So if there's a question that you feel is coming your way that doesn't resonate or you don't have much to say, you can pass. But we'd love to hear from you when you feel moved to do so. And as I said earlier, we are going to have a Q&A towards the end. So if you are hearing comments and they are, getting some questions for you, feel free to write those down and ask them at the end. So the first question for our panel group, it's a short and sweet one, but it's a big one. What challenges do Indigenous people face in educational structures? And I would like to open the floor to whoever. You're grabbing the mic. You're going. Okay. Off you go. We'll give you a few moments, and then we'll move the mic to the next person. Thank you.
So in my teacher-educator role, I've been at the University of Calgary for the past 10 years, and in 2013, I was hired as part of an Indigenous cluster hire, and so there were 5 of us pulled into the education faculty. And at the same time in history, we were asked to design and deliver a mandatory, I'm going to say that again, a mandatory Indigenous education course to our pre-service teachers. This was a huge groundbreaking stride at the University of Calgary. So for the past 10 years, I've been teaching that class and learning a lot about what not to do, what to do, and how to really, I think, in terms of bringing forward the Métis perspective, pushing back on power structures that inherently are biased towards our First Nations cousins. I'm a plain speaker. You're going to hear me share some truths about what I do within the Academy. As a teacher-educator, I look at my role in the Academy as one of bearing great responsibility. Each teacher, each pre-service teacher who will enter the classroom, I've heard people cite statistics around having impact on over 3,000 lives in their careers, and I would say that's an underestimate. So the role that I take as a teacher educator at the University of Calgary is one that I hold, I carry great weight, and I bring that into my classroom. But because of the ways in which our history as Métis peoples has been erased, it is deeply personal to me. And so when I enter the classroom, I often, so I describe my teaching as teaching with extreme kindness, because one of the greatest challenges as a Métis scholar and educator is that we are entering realms where people, and you know, I'll use language. There is a theory called the pedagogy of ignorance, where people have not learned about our people. And so oftentimes I am entering spaces where people hold very racist ideas about who we are as a people. And so my role as a teacher educator in teaching Indigenous education to future teachers, practicing teachers, is really to start to break down those stereotypes, those racist ideas, the way that we've been portrayed throughout history. And so my role, I teach with extreme kindness because I know that often with a lift of my eyebrow in the wrong direction, or if I say the wrong word, I can turn an entire classroom off. And I know how tension-filled and tenuous that is. And so the relational way that I teach is really about establishing trust and connection with each of my students, knowing that they will enter their classrooms and will be affecting how they view Métis children for generations. And so that is a huge responsibility. It's one I don't take lightly. So what challenges do we face in Métis education? It's moving away from a myopic focus on our First Nations cousins. And I do that in a way that is honoring of our ancestral ways, because they are kin. And so I cannot take an exclusive approach because I'm related. And oftentimes when I go through my own family lineage, I, to date, have at least 8 First Nations within my family tree. And so I always respect and honor and value those lineages alongside my own Métis family. And so the challenges I think that are facing Métis educators, you know, or Métis education writ large, is how do we redefine education to be respectful and inclusive of Métis knowledge traditions? And that is a huge challenge. Oftentimes at the end of our 8 weeks together in my classes, our students will go out fired up, all excited to teach, and then they hit power structures that shut them down. And that is the reality. So pushing forward in Alberta, where I'm based, we have a teaching quality standard number 5, which mandates the inclusion of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit perspectives across all subject areas, across all grade levels. I can tell you through my research and through working on the ground with practicing teachers, that is not done effectively. I wish it was. We're doing everything possible to make it happen. But the reality is oftentimes the power structures will shut down people who come in with different perspectives. And so, I mean, I could take up your entire hour with the challenges, but I think those are 2 things that really come to mind for me.
Wonderful, thank you. Who would like to speak next?
Well, just on an international perspective, I just want to highlight that the International Decade of Indigenous Languages was launched in 2022 till 2032. And why I'm highlighting that is because when you have international years or decades, they're not necessarily celebrations. They're actually a call to action. So I think that globally, even though there's over 4,000 Indigenous languages, we're talking about the preservation, revitalization, and promotion, and many of these languages are dying. And not many people don't like to use that word, but are in close to extinction. And I think that's, in Canada, that's also a real threat and a real reality. And I was really inspired when I was hearing Audrey speak about learning, relearning Southern Mischief, and I feel there's language, culture, education is all interconnected. So having that as a fundamental human right, of accessing education for Indigenous peoples across Canada, having access to their language is super a really important reflection on how we can do that. And I did learn from, Statistics Canada can be sometimes depressing, but Michif is actually one of the only Indigenous languages that is a little bit on the up revival, and I think that's super inspiring. And there's a lot of amazing things. So I'm hoping to change that challenge into inspiration. But I do think when we think about that, and when you think about the UN and even the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, why do these spaces exist? It is a call to action for the global community to realize and acknowledge that all Indigenous peoples have lived through colonial histories, and have to essentially fight for their rights in their respective jurisdictions, right? So how can we create those spaces to move progress forward?
Thank you.
Oh, where do I start? There's so many. From where I've been in my professional life, I really have a pulse on the challenges in kind of helping people re-engage with the education system and continue to be engaged. Mainstream education really fails to reflect who we are as people, to incorporate our histories, our knowledge, and our knowledge keepers and perspectives. And a lack of cultural relevance really impacts students. They don't see themselves. They're disconnected from that educational context. And the environment too. The educational environment is very disconnecting for them. And, it comes from the traumatic histories that we have. While we may not have parents that were connected to residential schools, we likely had grandparents or great-grandparents, and the intergenerational trauma aspect on trust in the educational system is still there, and it's going to take a long time for that to heal. Our students are still encountering racism at every level within academia. There's discrimination within the educational systems, both from peers and from their educators. And we see in a lot of cases that that educational system tends to have lower expectations on our students. We get the stereotyping, exclusion, all of that. And it really can have an impact on their performance and their willingness to stay engaged in that educational system. The one that I think is most prevalent to the work that I do within GDI, we talk in acronyms a lot at GDI. We have a ton of them. So Gabriel Dumont Institute is the location. A lot of our Indigenous communities are often in rural and remote locations, northern locations, where quality facilities don't exist in a lot of cases, and resources are limited. And qualified teachers aren't often locals. So we're talking physical infrastructure, educational materials, the opportunities, and even financial constraints. It causes a lot of harm there. And there's always this expectation that if you live in a rural, a remote, or a northern community, that you need to leave your community to get a quality education. And I don't think that's the case, and it shouldn't be the case. Community-based education has been really at the heart of the Métis forever. It's in our blood. It's how we've always done things. If we look at the system of apprenticeship, one person working with another person to transfer that knowledge down generation to generation. It's always been done on a community level. And there's that huge disconnect in the traditional academia that we have right now, where we expect people to leave their home communities, leave their areas of comfort where they're supported and valued for who and what they are. That it falls apart for a lot of people. They don't have the ability to do that, and we need to be respectful of it. And often there is a severe lack of Indigenous educators. Being able to see yourself in your teacher has a huge, huge impact. I can be very proud that Gabriel Dumont Institute in 1980, when we were first incorporated, we became one of the first teacher education programs in Saskatchewan that was Métis specific. We've graduated, I think we're over 1,400 Métis educators since 1980, and those are teachers that are in our schools now, teaching our kids all across the province. And we can see that since this program has been around, educational attainment rates, post-secondary educational attainment rates have gone up because people see themselves in their teacher. They can feel inspired and know that, you know, it's not just the white man's world that you're there. It's, you see a Métis person or an Indigenous person there, and you know that you can also belong there, that you have a future in that world. And yeah, that's a big one. I was like, I could go on and on. I'm like, I gotta stop myself sometimes.
First question. We'll
Yes.
hear from Simon quickly,
Yes,
and
it'll
then
be quick.
we'll move into some other questions.
I'll take a slightly different tack and give a very superficial Marxist analysis of post-secondary education. And so if we look at universities as caught between two models, medieval liberal university, the master, the students, they were probably more sexist than racist back then, right? It's no great thing, but it was a different attitude to education. And now, of course, a neoliberal body, a corporate body, which is profit-driven, which is to feed the machinations of capital. If it doesn't, states change them. All right, so New Zealand universities are going through massive change at the moment. It will come here. Job losses, across the board. What's taught, how it's taught, will be governed by the interests of capital, which is mobile as hell. You can ring up and move $1 zillion in a phone call, compared to the relative immobility of labour, of workers, of students. Staff are actually, we can lecture from anywhere with Wi-Fi. So COVID, capital got really excited during COVID. So we don't need bricks and mortars, we just need Wi-Fi. All right, so it's changed and it will not go back to how it was, right? That's the logic of capital. It's driven to accumulate profit. And yet in the universities, we wear gowns, because they used to wear gowns. We still have a medieval, romanticism. That is not how governments or capitalists look at these institutions. So you then put Indigenous staff, students, gardeners, janitors, anybody into that context. On the one hand, in those days, medieval Gilded was kind of blind to race, ethnicity, wasn't blind to gender. Neoliberal, same. If you've got $1 billion, you've got $1 billion. But we know that racism is embedded through all of that. And turning that around without naming what it is, you very rarely hear the words racism mentioned by people at the highest levels, because it doesn't happen. So we've got to me, name the problem before you can have the solution. And what we have is predatory capitalism running the world. Talk about more of this tomorrow on the emergency management thing. But that's why I didn't want to be here with my New Zealand government tax-funded hat on.
Thank you. For the second question, in the interests of time, what I'd like to do is pose the question and have whoever is feeling prompted to speak can grab the mic, which means not all four of you have to answer. Does that sound good with everybody? Question number 2. Also a big question. In what ways does the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge and cultural preservation within educational frameworks enhance our community well-being? So one more time. In what ways does the incorporation of Indigenous knowledge and cultural preservation within our frameworks of education enhance community well-being? And I'll ask you to limit your answer to about 2 minutes. Who would like to take a go? Oh, turn that on.
Yeah. So I think, building on the commodification of the knowledge economy, which is definitely very present in the post-secondaries, sadly, it's infiltrating our K-12 systems as well. I think, in terms of how we enhance community well-being through the integration of Indigenous, and in this case, Métis principles, is something that I know I'm very passionate about. So as a PhD student, I very deliberately chose to go back to my ancestral community of Fishing Lake Métis settlement up in northeastern Alberta, where my mother and father are both from. I was born and raised in BC. They moved to find work, and so that's a common narrative of the Métis people. And so it was really important to me when I had the privilege of going into graduate studies, and I actually never knew what graduate studies was. I thought this is a prime opportunity to start to learn more than just the stories of my people, because I'd heard them at home, I heard the names, but I didn't experience what it was like to work as a collective. And this morning's keynote speaker spoke a lot about the collective, and it just, our elder spoke about the collective ways of our people. And for me, it was really important that I learn what that was like in community. And so when I was in Fishing Lake in the settlement and working alongside our people, what I learned is that we are stronger together, we are braver together, we are better together. And that pushes against the uber competitive ethos that an individualistic profiteering society drives home as their guiding values and principles. So when I am in the classroom working with my students or out in community, I am always looking for our traditional values. Right now I'm right in the middle of teaching the first ever Métis Matters course at the University of Calgary. So I designed and I'm now delivering, that's disgusting, 2024. It's the first ever Métis course at the University of Calgary. So I'm gonna pause, right? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, but you know what? It's about damn time. 2024, I find it despicable that it's 2024 teaching the first ever Métis Matters course. So I'm teaching hard, and we got a lot of catching up to do. And so right now we're at the resistance, and I'm going back to our traditional ways and bringing those principles forward because they bring meaning. They bring something of value to our world that we're missing. With the uber competitive, the capitalist model, it's not working. It's not working. And so that humanistic, that way of being together in a healthy way is something that I think we need to return to. And in this time of climate change, anxieties, and all of the things that we're facing around the world with wars, our students are struggling. I can tell you that when I stand in front of my class of 30, the anxiety levels are through the roof. And so I bring them together to do a lot of active learning, I bring in community, because I believe our community holds a lot of knowledge. And that is something that our people are missing and longing for. And so to me, Indigenous principles have got great value for our current educational system. So I'm working hard to do what bit I can to bring back our traditional ways.
Love to.
Sure, you got 2 minutes.
I got that on. So, the system of capital. We have a different kind of capital. We have cultural capital as well, and our knowledge capital within our Métis communities, and that's a huge thing. With GDI bringing in our first teacher education program in the 80s, I guess that was the first time that the University of Saskatchewan had a Métis specific course, but it was because a Métis Institute had to drive that forward. Since then, we've brought in a Master's of Education, and this fall, we are proudly bringing in the first Métis specific educational doctorate program as well. And looking at, we'll have a group of 10 to 12 Métis educators who are going to be learning in a different structure. They're not going to be in the regular academia structure where it is very profit-driven. We're driven by something completely different. We're driven by revitalizing and maintaining our culture and preserving it for generations to come, for revitalizing our languages and bringing those back. We have a completely different goal. And if we really want to make changes in the educational frameworks by including Métis in that, I think there needs to be that mentality change that capital, profit aren't the only thing that should be driving education. There should be a greater purpose for it. And when us as Métis people, when we're looking at things, I have a little bit of a problem with the first question being all about, what challenges, because we're a very strength-based people. What are our strengths? What do we have to bring and give to the world? And having our own programs is one of those things that I think is really powerful, and a different way of looking at education and what our goals for education should be.
Thank you. Now, we've got a very eager gentleman at the microphone. You got a question.
Yes, it's not a question. I'd like to make a statement of something that's encouraging for the Métis and the First Nation and the Inuit. I sit on the Northern Ontario School of Medicine board, and there's a university in Sudbury, and there's also one in Thunder Bay. And we have a lot of Indigenous students going to that school. And as they progress in school, the goal of that school is to, once you get these people becoming doctors, that they go back into their communities. And what's happening right now is while they're doing their studies at the universities, they have to go every year and live on a reserve for 6 weeks. It's part of the studies. And of course, they get to know the different reserves and the different people in the different reserves. But what I want to get at is it's a very encouraging form of education, because these people, they go into these reserves, and a lot of them end up going home and setting up doctor practices there. And a lot of those young students who feel hopeless and helpless as young students, thinking that they'll never go anywhere, they'll never get out of this reserve, and they see that very person there who was there right where they are now, and it gives them great hope and great encouragement, so they might go on and carry on into education. So I just thought I'd mention that as a little bit of encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you very much. Did you have a comment, Simon? Just on the incorporation. Your mic is not on. Just give her a click.
It's better. So a lot of my work now is designing policy, ethics agreements, research management structures, governance boards, and so on, where Indigenous knowledges are working in with the so-called Western science. And we have regular challenges to the validity of our knowledges, right? It happens everywhere. And some big hitters come in against Indigenous knowledge. Professor Richard Dawkins crawled out of some rock and dumped on Māori about 2 years ago. And we had huge support. A lot of allies came out and vocalised, and it was great. but it's not a methodological debate. We're kind of treating it as a we're talking methodology, but it's not. It's a political debate, and academics, researchers are poorly equipped in that space, just as many politicians are poorly equipped for a methodological debate. So, with our governance boards, Indigenous governance boards, committees, and we have representation liaison managers and that everywhere. It's understanding what the dispute is and who to bring to the argument and what argument they actually put on the table, because it's a bait and switch thing. It's not a conspiracy. I'm not paranoid. A little paranoid. It's healthy for you, but we are getting attacked in ways that we're kind of always coming in, and then it's moved on, and then it's something else, and then you're kind of sitting there, but, and it's not. So, historically, traditionally, we're nimble and we're agile, and there's kind of an aggression, and I don't know how many Māori you've met, but there's an edge. And same with Métis, I find that. Like, yeah, we're all friendly until, there's a line crossed. And so we've got to identify the arguments and the debates, and who is best equipped to fight that. At the moment, it's whoever's got 10 minutes free in the afternoon kind of thing, Kia ora.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your answers. We're moving on to our last question before we open the floor up to our participants for questions and comments. And we have time for probably two short answers here. How can partnerships and collaboration with mainstream educational systems mitigate these challenges while still preserving Indigenous knowledge and practices? So again, how can partnerships and collaboration with mainstream educational systems mitigate these challenges while still preserving Indigenous knowledge and practices? We have time to hear from two of the panelists.
I don't want to break tradition.
It's on now, yeah.
Okay. So I came across that question and I thought, well, it's so specific to local context that it's actually hard to comment on. But what I can tell you from doing community engaged scholarship, it's a big part of what I do. Part of the challenge I'm finding is bridging the Indigenous knowledge traditions into the academy, and certainly that valuing of knowledge traditions is something I think in large part due to Maori scholars, Linda Tue-Smith, like just incredible, influential international scholars who I know when I was in graduate studies, I came across decolonizing methodologies and it was like a life buoy. That book is so well loved, it's tattered, it's marked up, it's because it became a place of hope for me when I was encountering Eurocentric white knowledge traditions that didn't make sense to me. And so, when I think about mitigating or forming partnerships with the post-secondaries or K-12, I think part of it is understanding, starting to talk to one another and engaging in these critical conversations. And so I'm in southern Alberta, and what I've started to do we've had a governance restructure in Alberta, and I've reached out to the new district, I think we're called chiefs, captains, I can't remember, but the new political leadership, and I said, I'm here in the academy, and I know that there's knowledge in our own community that I need brought in to the academy, and hopefully vice versa. And so I think that's where a good partnership starts. It's in the respect for one another. And typically, our worlds have been removed from one another, and so much so that oftentimes we'll get our own politicians, our own people, thinking because we've got advanced degrees that we're somehow the enemy. And I think that we really have to start rethinking that, because some of us are working hard, really, really hard. I have a 30-page CV. We're working hard to make sure that our voices as Métis peoples are heard, recognized, and valued within higher institution settings. And if you're going to have a true partnership, you have to start with that recognition. I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm trying to start a dialogue, because it is about exchange of knowledge traditions. And as Métis people, that's our way. We want to speak a common language, to come together and to share our gifts. And so that question, I think that's as vague, general as I can get.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
I was like, I will try to be general, but I had like a 10-point plan going. And a lot of it, you know, there are things that GDI we've been doing for a long time and that we continue to try to do. I'll give kind of one example when it comes to kind of co-creation of curriculum. In the early 90s, the Dumont Technical Institute was incorporated under the GDI umbrella. And this was a unique partnership between Métis organization and the province of Saskatchewan, no matter what I might have to say about the province these days. They recognized the need and the opportunities in incorporating a Métis-specific technical institute under the regional college system. They recognized that, hey, we could just, you know, trust all of the regional colleges that are out there to deliver technical skills training, or we could let the Métis do it themselves. And I think that's something that can't be ignored, in that if we're gonna have partnerships, there has to be a point where you let us do it ourselves. Give us the ability to teach our own people, to bring our own curriculum into our own communities. We're still one of the very few providers of community-based education in Saskatchewan. Like I've said, there's often this idea that if someone's going to get a higher education, they have to leave their community. And it shouldn't be like that. Especially in our northern communities in Saskatchewan, we bring education into a northern community, and the north, they surround themselves. They support each other. We'll see students carpooling from one small community to another small community to another to pick up all of their classmates and make it into kind of one of the central communities. They're not having to go to a completely different setting. When you're used to a small northern community, going to the big urban city is traumatic in and of itself. So having a Métis-based educational system that can provide community-based education and curriculum that is supported by both the province and the Métis, that infuses our own cultural and identities into that curriculum, the students are more engaged, the educational attainments are greater, the prospects of those students continuing on in the educational system are greater.
Thank you. Yeah, it looks like do you want to quickly say?
I was thinking both on these because I'm from the East Coast, and Mi'kmaq teachings has, that's quite well known as the two-eyed seeing. So how can we see the world from one lens, which is more the modern scientific lens, and then from traditional Indigenous knowledge, and weaving that Indigenous knowledge into partnerships, collaboration, and education systems. I think you were speaking to it, the complexity, right, of the really education systems are very locally rooted. Very complex. Jurisdictions are a big issue. That was a really great example of partnership and collaboration. And then for me, taking that on a global lens, I really don't see us being able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without Indigenous knowledge and perspectives, without every person on this planet reconnecting with the land that they live on, with that, and achieving that. And then also, and that comes with education. So how can we ensure that every child that goes through the public school systems learn Indigenous knowledge and well-being? And then there's also that fundamental human right for Indigenous people. So I see walking side by side that human rights issue for and by Indigenous peoples, for Métis people, Inuit, First Nations, have the rights to having their rights for their Indigenous systems, like Saskatchewan is a great model and what you're doing. But then also for my kids and non-Indigenous, what's our role in this reconciliation process to learn and better understand, and that being infused and weaved into our public education systems, so that hopefully all the decision makers are actually making decisions long-term with that in mind and that knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to open the floor to our participants. We have time. We have about 10 minutes, so we have time for a few questions. All you need to do is step up to the mic. Is there anybody that, yeah, right on. Lovely. And if you have a certain person that you're hoping to address it to, you can do that as well.
I'll follow my colleague, my friend, Yvonne. I have a bit more of a statement, and I just want to make a mention of a couple of statistics here that will frame this issue of developmental goals. 84 million children and youth will not be in school, even though we're trying to accomplish something by 2030. 300 million students will lack basic numeracy and literacy at a time when we're going into the fourth industrial revolution, where that is exactly what's needed. 100 billion annual will be required for most of the world countries to actually close the gap in education and achieve some of these developmental goals. The problem, of course, and this is what you're going to see here in Canada as well, is that there is a transfer of knowledge and skills that takes place from the redundant areas of our planet or the isolated areas, northern communities in Canada, to the main centers. And I think this is what Audrey was trying to mention. In the Canadian context, we, other than, GDI is a beacon of hope. There is no accredited post-secondary institution for Métis. And even though the last question asked, how can you partner, how can you work this out? My argument is the only way to ensure that Métis have access to excellent post-secondary education is by having Métis institutions in this country, not by partnering, being an affiliate of the University of Regina or the University of Saskatchewan or any other university, but by becoming an entity in by itself. And the last part of my comments, and I'm sorry about this length, is that in terms of K-12 for primary and secondary education, the federal government has never provided any resources for Métis. We're still fighting this issue of jurisdictional differences here between the BNA Act and sections 91 and 92 and so on. In the meantime, Métis people still don't have rightful control over Métis education. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was a lot of information at the beginning. Those numbers were staggering. Billions and billions and millions, and no, it's okay, but it's that's what it is, right? It is that. Please, come on up.
Like you, I have a lot of, listening to you, a lot of questions went through my mind. I didn't have a pen or anything, but the one that stuck with me is, how do you incorporate tradition and culture into your teachings? Not necessarily harvesting, but the gathering, culture end of it and stuff like that. So when you take somebody off of the reserve or the settlement, like you say, they're away from their thread, right? So, how do you incorporate all of that to give them a better feel of learning, right?
Yeah, that's, I never know if this is working. Thank you for that question. It's actually integral to my teaching philosophy to bring in knowledge keepers. So I've developed Indigenous education. It's a call to action for the TRC 94 calls. And what I do within that graduate program, it's a 4-course program, it's at the master's level. And what I asked for at the University of Calgary when they said to me, what is your ideal teaching situation? I said, I would like elders beside me the entire 10 days of the summer courses. And so they made some structural shifts. They don't pay them as much as they should be for their knowledge, but they are with me from 9 to 5 for the 10 days of the entire 10 days of the summer courses. And that, to me, is absolutely essential. because I know where I don't know enough. And so in terms of Michif language, in terms of, any of the ceremonial aspects, they are there to guide me and to walk beside me, and so they're co-instructors. And to me that, we also go out and do land-based, we do ceremonies. In Calgary we have Nose Hill that has the sun wheel, we have residential school where we tour the students through. So I do a lot of land-based alongside the everyday presence of elders. I want them to see the elders on par with those of us that have gone through the academy. So that to me is one of the central ways that I bring in Indigenous knowledge traditions. And I usually have two alongside of me. So it's not a guest lecture, they're with me. And so I could go on and on.
Okay.
But yeah, that's how I do it.
Audrey, do you want to just make a mention just in a moment or two, please? Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to add one thing there. I think that's all beautiful and fantastic. We try to incorporate, Michif language, Métis material culture, all of that. But on top of this, one of the biggest things that we can do for our students, especially when we're bringing them out of their home communities, is we deliver programs in a cohort model, which is very different from a lot of traditional post-secondary. We will have the same group of 20 students who move through their entire educational program year after year together. And that's bringing a different kind of Métis knowledge, of community, and supporting each other, and living as family. We're all cousins. And I think that is also really important, especially when we're considering bringing people in from afar who maybe don't have a support system there. We help them develop a support system that continues on with them.
Thank you, Audrey. We have a few more questions.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Something that comes to my mind is that we're talking about the Métis language and education and everything, which is one of the most important things that I look for. And how do you feel about, planting your seed at a young age is the main thing. You talk about universities and starting and continuing there. But there's educational kits that I just happen to be on a language committee and putting out and working on educational kits to bring into schools at a young age, to give them, to ground them to Mother Earth and to their knowledge before they get to the part of where you're speaking to. So at that young age, at the grassroots of planting that seed, I think is one of the most important parts. And you want to have a Métis, specific college or stuff this year. Well, that's a great idea also. But the biggest college that you can have is the beginning of the grassroots. And myself, and I don't know how you feel about that, but that is something that we're pushing for, especially in every community. Everybody should have schools that has been offered, not only in English language, but I specify it should be put in myself personally because I'm French, and Métis, so I go Michif, French, and English. It's taught in all three languages as well.
Thank you. Yep. And this is our last question.
Okay. My prayer has always been for the nation is that we as parents would bring up our children in an environment where they can be the very best that they can be. That's where I want to go right now. Where you see that happening, where they're not in an environment where they can be the very best that they can be, because they can all be the very best that they can be if they're in the right environment. Is there things in place, enough things in place to help these families who are having difficulties with with these kind of decisions that are made within the family to make sure that the children have the opportunity to be the very best they can be? That's very close to my heart, and I don't want to be negative, but I think it has to be addressed. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you for ending us there, actually. That's a lovely sentiment. And I'm sure that there are others in the group who would like to ask more questions. We are out of time for the formalized panel, but we are rolling into a break. And it's about 2:15 now, and that wraps up at 2:40 in the main room. But I do invite our panel, if you maybe want to make yourselves available for a few moments following this, if people have some specific comments or questions for you. You never have enough time in these things, do you? It's always nice to hear more and to be able to get deeper and ask more questions. So I want to thank the panel. Thank you for making yourself available and for speaking with us and sharing your ideas and your knowledge. Maybe let's give them a round of applause. All right, so we'll keep the panel maybe here for a few more moments, and we will, as I say, take a break and reconvene in the main room at 2:40. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending the panel.
They benefit so much from your wisdom and knowledge and inclusion. Thank you so much.
You see this Levert right here? You see this Levat here?